In Stanton, southern Pennsylvania, Will Coulson is starting his new job as a train conductor and is paired with railroad engineer Frank Barnes. Meanwhile, yard hostlers Dewey and Gillies are moving a mixed freight Allegheny and West Virginia Railroad train at Fuller Yard in northern Pennsylvania. At the same time, a school is having a field trip to the Fuller Yard. Will and Frank are on their way to pick up train cars in Stanton. Dewey, the engineer, realizes that a trailing point switch ahead is not correctly aligned and leaves the cab of lead locomotive 777 to change it, setting the throttle to idle. However, it pops into full power before he can get back on, leaving the train unattended and going south at full speed down the main line. Meanwhile, on Milesburg Yard, Will is having a hard time getting along with Frank, as he made his first mistake by turning the train in the wrong direction. Connie arrives at Fuller Yard and finds out that an unmanned train with no air brakes is rolling into opposing traffic. She then orders Dewey and Gillies to go after it. Meanwhile, the train is now on the main rail line at high speed. Connie immediately contacts the conductor of the train full of students and instructs them to divert to a siding at Portville. Then she contacted Ned and asked him to go to milepost 5 and throw the siding switch because they have a coaster. Meanwhile, Will and Frank are at the Stanton curve, not yet aware of the coaster heading their way. On the Fuller Yard, Scott Werner arrives and overheard about the coaster. He is there to give presentation for the school field trip regarding on-rail road safety. Later, Ned arrived at milepost 5 and had already switched sidings while waiting for the train. Connie saw molten phenol in the manifest and asked Bunny to contact the shipper to know exactly what was in cars 7 to 10. Then Ned saw Dewey and Gillies on a high rail and immediately called Connie to inform her that the train had already passed, which made them realize that the train was under power. She then ordered Dewey and Gillies to take the southbound track to catch up and try to climb on if it's still going slow. They have until milepost 13 before the track split. Then she asked Ned to follow the main line to get a visual of the train. Meanwhile, the unmanned train is already closing on the train full of students. The conductor sees train 777 coming right at them, and luckily the track split and the train full of students avoided a head-on collision with the unmanaged train. Will and Frank arrived at the zinc plant in southern Pennsylvania to take 20 train cars. Meanwhile, Connie had already contacted the Pennsylvania police to ask for assistance in posting officers at all the mainline crossings. Dewey and Gillies were able to catch up with the train, but the track split before they could get on. While leaving the zinc plant, Frank realized that they had 4.5 more cars to clear, and he resented Will for not doing his job well. Later, regional dispatch called and informed them of the unmanned train on their track and advised them to proceed to the next siding and wait for further instructions. The incident is now all over the news. Mr. Galvin called Connie and asked about the cargo. Connie emphasizes her concern about the chemical molten phenol in cars 7 to 10 and 16 to 19, which they are trying to determine what it is. Scott Werner heard what Connie's was saying and told her that he knew what it was. Scott then explained to Mr. Galvin that it is very toxic and highly combustible. Connie suggested derailing it after it crosses Findlay before it gets into a populated area. But Mr. Galvin decided to go against it concerning the cost it would incur for the company. Later, Frank realized that they were not going to fit in the next siding and requested the dispatch to realign the track and go to the nearest rip track. Meanwhile, on Keating Summit in central Pennsylvania, they plan to rappel Ryan Scott into the train by helicopter and put another train in front of it to slow it down. Judd Stewart drives the train in front of 777. He applied the brakes, hoping to get the train behind him to slow down, but the train was too fast, and the plan ended disastrously. Ryan Scott is injured, and Judd Stewart was killed when his train derailed. Not so far away, Frank and Will's train is closing in and about to go head-to-head with the 777. Mr. Galvin is angry after learning from the news that another train is on the track. Frank called his daughters, who were working in Hooters, to say "I love you," anticipating he could die in a couple of minutes. Moments later, Will and Frank saw the 777 right in front of them. The train was able to switch, avoiding a head-to-head collision, but the end train was still hit by 777. Central Dispatch contacts them, informing them that they are going to use standard DRE to derail the train. Frank goes down the train and unhooks it from its cars. He plans to catch up on 777, then hooks their train from behind. Moments later, Connie contacted them and was surprised to learn that Will and Frank were trying to catch up to 777. Frank explained to her that they plan to tie the train into their locomotive and try to slow it down from behind, and expresses his opinion that the derailleur will not work because of the current weight and speed of the train. Meanwhile, evacuation is ongoing in Arklow. Frank called Connie over the radio and requested a regular update on the speed and location of 777. As the unmanned train was getting near Arklow, Connie advised them to slow down just in case the derailleur worked to give them enough time to stop. But Frank kept the train at full speed, knowing the derailleur wouldn't work. Later, as Frank expected, the derailleur did not work. Connie informs him immediately. Will and Frank continue to catch up on the train, while in the news, they are saying that this will be the worst disaster in Pennsylvania if the train is derailed in Stanton. Meanwhile, in Stanton, Will's wife just learned about the unmanned train and the mandatory evacuations. Later, Frank and Will are on the news. Their family saw them on the train trying to catch up on the unmanned train 777. The news also reveals their plan to catch up, hook up, and brake in an effort to slow it down. Later, as they get close to the unmanned train, Will Coulson goes to the back and signals to Frank about their gap in the 777. But Coulson got injured in his attempt to lock the train. Coulson gets back to Frank and tapes his foot injury. Then Frank started to apply the brakes and alternate them with full throttle. He managed to get it under 50, but it's not enough because the limit in the curve is just 15. Coulson then suggested using the brakes on the freight cars. Frank leaves Coulson to handle the brakes while he goes to each car to manually set the brakes. He continues to run on top towards the front of 777. When suddenly the brakes on their locomotive exploded. Frank instructs Coulson to use the independent brakes on his signal as they pass through the Stanton curve. As the train is passing through the curve, Coulson hits the independent brakes and manages to slow down the 777 so as not to derail in the curve. Then Frank continues to move forward in front of the train, but he is stopped when he reaches a wide gap between the trains. Suddenly, Ned arrives, driving a truck. Coulson managed to jump on the back of the truck, and Ned drove fast to match the truck's speed to the train. Then, before they ran out of parallel road, Coulson was able to jump and board the 777, then he reduces the throttle to idle, and applies the brakes, finally bringing the runaway train to a safe stop. Darcy arrives with her and Will's son and reunites with him, and Connie comes to congratulate the men, who are hailed as heroes. Later, it's revealed that Frank is promoted and later retires with full benefits. Will is reconciled with Darcy, who is expecting their second child. Connie is promoted to Galvin's VP position, while it's implied that Galvin was fired for his poor handling of the incident. Ryan makes a full recovery, and Dewey, who is held liable for causing the incident, is fired from his job and goes on to work in the fast food industry. Thank you for watching movie quotes and recaps. And for more videos, please hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell.